All right. Sweet. All right, let's go ahead and rock and roll through activity one. Hopefully, you can finish in about 20-ish minutes and then have some time, do activity two, and then hang around later if y'all have any other questions. All right, number one, what is the relationship between form and function? Just generally speaking, what is the relationship here?
Closely related.
Exactly. And how are they closely related?
Because it takes on a certain form and an adaptation to its environment so that it can have a certain function that helps it survive.
Nice. And what do you call it when there are multiple different species that evolve to have similar features to adapt to that kind of environment?
Are you talking about like analogous structures or like convergent evolution?
Yeah, convergent evolution. Nice. They're all kind of converging. It's like that one slide with the whale, the penguin, and I think a tuna, where they've all converged to kind of that same torpedo-like shape because that's what allows them to move quickly through the water. So they all kind of converge on the same looking thing. Sweet. All right. Number two, how does the surface area to volume ratio of an organism impact its capacity to exchange nutrients? If an organism wants to exchange a lot of nutrients, does it want to have a high or a low surface area to volume ratio?
High, right?
High, yeah. If you want to exchange a bunch of things, you want to have a really high surface area to volume ratio. Does a starfish or a water balloon have a higher surface area to volume ratio?
Water balloon.
Starfish, right?
Probably a starfish.
Oh, never mind.
Generally speaking, if you're trying to determine what's going to give something more surface area to volume ratio, things that are spherical have like the least typically. Think about it because it's as like compressed as you can get. And anytime you stretch that shape even into a box or out flatter or any bit longer, you're getting more surface area but maintaining the same volume. So usually a circle is like lower surface area to volume ratio. And then something that's like a starfish where it's like really pointy or something really flat has a higher surface area to volume ratio. Now, that said, if you're a really small circle, you can still have a really high surface area to volume ratio because there's not a lot of volume, but a decent bit of surface area. But once you start getting bigger and bigger, excuse me, you start to have a whole lot of volume, but not nearly as much surface area. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's see. How long do you think an organism would last if it's unable to exchange things like nutrients, waste, and gases?
No time.
Once in a day.
Right. It's not going to last very long. And if the way to get more exchange going on is to have a higher surface area to volume ratio, how evolutionarily important do you think it's going to be to get that high surface area to volume ratio?
Very
Very important.
Very important, yeah. And that's why so many unicellular things work really well because they're super small and so they're automatically going to get a pretty good surface area to volume ratio. Whereas larger organisms like us have to kind of find other complicated things in order to deal with it. All right, that's that. No need to beat a dead horse. I'm sure y'all have got this from last semester too. Number three, how does tissue shape impact tissue function? Where do you find each of them and why? Sydney, what did you have for this one?
So I'm still kind of confused on how it impacts the function. I guess it's just because like the tissue like shape is like the cells are like organized and that like helps animals like because cells go into tissues and then tissues go into organs and organs go into like complex body plans. But then there's three types of tissue shapes, and it's the cuboidal, columnar, and squamous. Where you can find them, I'm not really 100% sure on that, but I know like in the epithelial tissues that they're outside of the body and they like line the organs and cavities.
Nice, yeah. That's a big thing is talking about like knowing kind of some of the classifications behind it. So like epithelia is going to be all sorts of lining tissues. Later we'll talk a bit about muscle tissue. Like I think y'all can guess where you're going to find muscle tissue in your muscles. But where the tissue at is going to really impact kind of what you need it for. So yeah, thank you, Sydney. Just as she was saying, there's cuboidal, columnar, and squamous. And kind of like how with overall body plans, the shape is going to determine the function, the same thing is going to happen here. So one thing Dr. Fernandez mentioned in her lecture is that in the lungs, you need a lot of exchange going on in order to get all of the oxygen and carbon dioxide exchanged. So which of the three shapes do you think is going to allow for the most exchange?
The squamous, right?
The squamous, right? Because they're really flat and kind of thin. So that's going to allow a lot of exchange. Whereas if you had the columnars, imagine like a bunch of tubes sticking up, every bit of air would have to fight its way through all those columns before getting downwards. The squamous is super thin and flat, so it's really easy for air to just hit it and go in or go out. And then do you think it's going to be, so it could be layered, it could be stratified, it could be simple, which is just like a single layer, or pseudo-stratified, which is really only a thing for columnar. Which of those three do y'all think this would be?
Simple, right? For the air sacs.
Yeah, simple, exactly. Because if you want a lot of exchange, the best thing to do is have as much surface area to volume and then have it as thin as possible. If it was stratified with layers, that would just make more cells for the air to get to before it'd be able to go from like the airspace in your lungs into the actual bloodstream. I don't think she mentioned this in, there was a picture for it, but I don't know if she actually explained it. Another thing is the cuboidal ones. This is something that, well, you'll probably see in HPhys or something else too, but for that one, they have cube-like shapes, and those are really common in secretory ducts. So places where secretion happens, that's usually where there's a lot of cuboid cells. I think this was in one of the pictures kind of pointing at the gut. So along all those ducts and that kind of space, those kind of spaces, that's where you're going to find a lot of the cuboidal cells. And then another one she mentioned, like in the mouth where you need rapid regeneration, you will have what kind of cells in there?
The simple squamous ones again.
Mm-hmm.
Or stratified.
Yeah, it's stratified. That way it has multiple layers, so there's more protection, but the squamous are still relatively easy to produce. And then things like columnar, you'll find in your digestive tract for absorption. Cool. There's definitely a lot more for 3, but for sake of time, we're going to keep on moving. Number 4, define all the types of connective tissue. Oh my goodness, there's so many. Miraj, why don't you give us 2 or 3 of them, and then we'll bounce to someone else to keep explaining more.
So you have the loose connective tissue, which binds epithelial cells to underlying tissues. Then you have the fibrous connective tissues, which are made up of collagenous fibers, and they make up tendons and ligaments. Mm-hmm. You have bone, which obviously makes up the skeleton. Adipose tissue, which stores fat and stores fuel in adipose cells.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Maddie, do you want to take over and name a couple more?
There's also blood and cartilage.
Nice. Yeah, and blood's a really weird one. It doesn't seem connected because it's not like physically holding the thing together in the same way that tendons are or bones. But if you think of it, it like nutritionally connects the body. So it connects like the air coming from the lungs to all the rest of it, and it connects the GI tract, everything, by taking nutrients around. So it's kind of a weird member of a weird kind of connective tissue, but that's the classification it's in, and that's kind of what it does. One weird thing with bone too. Do any of y'all know what kind of cell makes bones?
Osteons. Right?
And
or
what kind specifically?
Osteoblasts.
Osteoblasts, yeah. And y'all don't have to know this, but osteoclasts are then the ones that take it away. But yeah, osteoblast, think of like someone in Star Wars shooting a blaster and this big beam comes out of it. Think of someone doing that, except they shoot out a bone. And now there's a bone there, and they've created a bone. That's what the osteoblasts do. there's also a couple different fibers that are classified in the connective tissue. There's collagenous fibers, reticular fibers, and elastic fibers. Which one of those fibers allows things to be stretchy?
Elastic.
Elastic fibers, nice. Which ones provide strength and flexibility?
Collagenous.
Collagen.
Yeah, the collagenous ones. They have, they have some flexibility there, but they're still keeping it strong too. Whereas the elastic ones are just very flexible. And then, which one connects connective tissue to other tissues?
Reticular.
Yeah, the reticular fibers. I think, a couple more things that are kind of in the same category. There's macrophages, which are part of your immune system. Do any of y'all remember what the process is that they perform in order to protect the body?
Phagocytosis?
Yeah, they perform phagocytosis, eating up the different bacteria or other invaders that would be in your body. And she also mentioned fibroblasts, which again, with blast, just think of it shooting something out or making it, it's going to blast out fibers, so it makes fiber-like particles. Okay, there's also plenty more for but we're gonna keep rolling just because there's still more to get to. Number 5, compare and contrast all the types of muscle tissue. Who would like to explain the muscles? Okay, thanks, Sam.
So there's skeletal muscle, which is involved in the voluntary movements, and it has bundles of long cells called muscle fibers. And then there's smooth tissue, which is involved in involuntary movements. It lines the walls of the digestive tract, urinary bladder, and arteries, and it has spindle-shaped cells. And then there's the cardiac muscle tissue, which lines the contracting wall of the heart. And that has branched fibers that connect via intercalated discs that help synchronize heart contraction.
Awesome. Yeah, the intercalated discs are super weird. If y'all have a minute afterwards, I'd like look up some cardiac muscle. It's really cool. But it looks like a bunch of tubes that are just kind of like streaming like all over the place, and it kind of connects to different ones. And in between are all the intercalated discs, which just kind of shotgun spreads the signal to contract, which allows the heart overall to contract. Whereas in skeletal muscle, you have like particular nerves going to it to cause contractions. So there's also these things called striations, which effectively just look like kind of lines drawn on the muscle that are resultant from sarcomeres. Y'all might have heard of like the Z thing, maybe from like high school anatomy. The muscle fibers contracting and stuff. Which of the 3 types have striations?
The skeletal and then the cardiac, right?
Yes, the skeletal and the cardiac. The smooth does not have striations. Which one or ones are consciously controlled?
Skeletal.
Skeletal. And then which ones are involuntary?
Smooth and cardiac.
Cardiac.
Yes. And Sam said all those. I'm just quizzing y'all to give you more chances to kind of think and hopefully not fall asleep. So that's probably good for muscle tissue too. All of these, there's so much more to say. There's a whole class, histology, you can take with Dr. Dean. Maybe wait until senior year because it's a bit of a doozy. But it's a really cool class. Some of my friends took it and they liked it a lot. But all you do is study tissues. There's so much to cover for all this, but we're going to keep rolling. Number 6, how does the body communicate with itself? Compare and contrast the 2 main paths in their constituent cells. Who'd like to take on number 6? Yes, Will.
Okay, so basically the body communicates itself through basically signaling, and that's done through the endocrine and nervous system. And so the difference is shown in figure 40.6 on page 878. It kind of shows like what the difference is. But so what happens is that the in the endocrine system is that an endocrine cell is secreted, and it has hormones which then go into the bloodstream, and then once they leave the bloodstream, they go into certain cells that have receptors for it, and the hormones bind to those receptors, and it causes a response. And then with the nervous system, so like it's basically like a nerve. It's like a nerve impulse goes all throughout the whole neuron, I guess, and it then goes to another cell and triggers a response.
Nice. Yeah, and just like you were saying, it's like one neuron goes to something and triggers a response. So the nervous system is going to end up being really specific in what it does. It's usually like you have a nerve telling this one part of your bicep to curl the 5-pound weight, pump and iron before whatever social event you've got for the night. It's like one thing sending one signal to one part of your body. Whereas the endocrine system just dumps all sorts of hormones into your blood, and it kind of just goes wherever your blood goes, which is all over your body. So it's super widespread and diffuse. As a result, do you think the endocrine system is going to create short-lasting or long-lasting effects?
Long-lasting.
Long-lasting.
Long-lasting, right? Because the effects are going to happen as long as there's that hormone in your bloodstream. Whereas nerves and the nervous system is going to create a fast action, but it's going to kind of go away really quickly. So it's really good like for things like nerves and muscles for running, but if you want to digest, you're probably going to use a lot of hormones to tell different muscles to move or how things are going to work with that. Any questions on 6? No? Okay, thank you, Will. Number 7, how do organisms regulate, generally speaking? Again, there's so many details here. Body temperature, pH, blood sugars, etc., etc. Lauren, what do you have for 7?
Well, I didn't get to 7, but looking at the notes, homeostasis and what is it? Negative feedback loops.
Yes. Yeah, and what's a negative feedback loop?
It's a control mechanism that damps its stimulus. So once like stimulus is high, it regulates it, and then it's done until it goes back again and it regulates it again.
Exactly, yeah. There's some sort of negative thing, so where one thing goes up, there's another system to control it and bring it back down. Whereas the opposite in positive feedback is once something starts going up, you have more systems that keep telling you to go up and up and up until it's all done. So like one classic example of positive feedback is giving birth. You don't want to like kind of give birth and let the baby come back and then kind of go back. Like you want to give birth and have the baby all the way out and be completely done. So once the contractions start happening, your body sends more hormones to like push faster and harder until it's all done. Whereas something like blood sugar, that would be something like a negative feedback where you want to maintain a certain level. Usually if you want to maintain a certain level of something, it's negative feedback. So like in the case of blood sugar, if you want your blood sugar to stay at about 100 and you eat a Kit Kat and it goes up to like 170, your body's going to do things to get it to come back down, like secrete insulin. Whereas if you start crashing and you haven't had sugar in a while, then your body's going to start releasing sugar into your bloodstream so it goes back up to normal. And then kind of generally too with the heat thing, a lot of animals can either kind of regulate or they'll conform to it. So we get endotherms and ectotherms, which we've already talked about a bunch this semester. Endotherms, they heat from the inside, so they actually have their own system of controlling their heat. Ectotherms receive their heat from outside their body. So those are the ones who like have to sit in the sun to warm up, not just for their tan, but because that's actually how they heat up. So yeah. Oh, what do you know? That's the end of activity 1. Hot diggity. Okay. Are there any questions on y'all's mind about anything from activity 1?
Do we need to know like the functions of each, or like I listed out all the types of the like connective tissue, but should we also be pretty familiar with the purpose of each tissue as well? Because I know she said it, but it's not really on the PowerPoint. So
Yeah, I would. Oh, that's brings up a good point. If there's anything she explains in words, but it doesn't appear in the PowerPoint, I would still consider it worth knowing. In fact, there's been a lot of things that she says that are really important information, uh, but it doesn't appear in a bullet point, but she says it and she explains it. So I would be taking notes of the things that she says. There's a couple things where she like, it was a pretty basic definition between two classes of something, but she just spoke. She said it, but she didn't have it written out. I would know all of those things. Yeah, good question, Raj. Okay, if y'all don't have any other questions, let's go ahead and get rocking and rolling on activity 2, and then we'll try and come back here at maybe 7:30, 7:35, and then we'll go from there. All right, do y'all want to go to the same groups or new groups? So decisive. Okay, we'll go back to the same groups and then I can mix y'all around later if we need to. Okay, all right, I will catch y'all back in about 15 or 20 minutes.
All right.
Okay, I think it should be up. All right, we had a good bit of time for activity 2, so hopefully y'all just have all of the answers. You're super ready to rock and roll. I can see Cole's ready to just explain the entire thing. So we'll start off with number 8. What's the difference between a poikilotherm and a homeotherm? Yeah, Jenna, what do you have for this one?
So a poikilotherm is an animal whose body temperature varies with its environment, and then a homeotherm has a relatively constant body temperature. So you can think of like homeostasis, about how it wants to keep it constant.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, think of homeostasis, and homeotherms maintain their heat, whereas poikilotherms vary a lot. Nice. Number 9, what are the 4 like physical processes for heat exchange?
I can do it.
Sweet.
So there's radiation, evaporation, convection, and conduction. And radiation is like sun, I think. And then evaporation is like sweating, like to cool yourself. And then convection, it kind of says it's almost like cold airflow. It's like, so if you were to like turn on a fan for like humans, that's how convection would be. And then conduction, you're like it's a direct transfer of heat and you're absorbing heat. So maybe it'd be like lying on like a warm surface or like a blanket, I would think. And then she also made like a point to say that when like heat is like transferring, it goes from high to low. Yeah. And that you're always trying to make sure your heat gained is equal to your heat loss.
Nice. Yeah. So especially when you're trying to maintain heat, you want to, and we'll get into this in a few questions about counter current exchange, but yes, for sure. And a couple other things too. These, they may sound a little bit similar, but if you just try and think of what is their method of getting heat across, like radiation, like Sydney was saying, the sun, or just think of any sort of wave. Think about radiation damages from like radiation of other waves, energy and whatnot. Evaporation has to do with fluids. Convection, you can also think of a convection oven where you're blowing hot air over something. So it's heat exchange going on because of air movement, and then conduction is heat exchange via physical contact. So if you put your hand on the top of the stove and it burns, that's from conduction. Lots of heat going from the stove to your hand. Not very fun. Yeah. Any questions on number 9? Neat. Okay, number 10. What are 5 adaptations for heat exchange? Maddie, what did you have for this one?
There was insulation, circulatory adaptations, there's cooling by evaporative heat loss, behavioral responses, and adjusting the metabolic heat production.
Awesome, thank you. And we're going to get into pretty much all of those later on, so we'll just hold on for a second for some examples. Speaking of which, on number 11, how can circulatory adaptations regulate blood flow and heat? Who would like to take 11?
I can do this one if nobody else wants to.
Oh, sorry. I think, Will, do you raise your hand?
Sure, I can do it. So for circulatory adaptations, so one way that it adapts is like how blood vessels will either get bigger or get smaller in a change of environment. So vasodilation is when the blood vessels widen and increases. That's when, and so that's going to increase blood flow, and then vasoconstriction is when the diameter is going to decrease, and that's going to reduce blood flow. And then it also goes over concurrent exchange, which basically it's basically the difference between arteries and veins. And veins is going to bring blood from the surface to the more internal part of the body, and it's also, the blood is going to be originally cool and it's going to get warmer as it gets closer to the middle of the inside the body. And then blood's also going to come out through an artery to the surface of the body, and it's going to get cooler as it comes closer to the surface. And so and they run like right next to each other, so that's why it's called countercurrent exchange.
Nice. Yes. Let's see. Jenna, if it's super, super cold outside and you walk outside and you want to maintain body heat, will you vasodilate or vasoconstrict?
Vasodilate, because you want more blood flowing.
Well, okay, it would be correct if you're trying to heat up certain parts of your body, but if you're going, let's say you're going for like a super long walk and you want to maintain body heat, you would probably vasoconstrict. It constricts the blood flow from going to like your limbs or to your skin, and that way most of the blood is staying inside your body where it's already warm. Whereas if you send more blood to your skin, it's going to catch the cold air, then the blood's going to cool off, and then over time your whole body's going to cool off. So if you walk outside and you're just kind of think of like, where does the blood want to flow in order to do that. Oh yeah, Sydney.
I think of it as like when you're constricting your blood vessels, it's keeping like your like heat like central and like close to you. And then when you're widening it, it's like keeping your heat like away, like in all parts of your body. I don't know. It's like kind of like people think like they want to keep like their blood like close like to the heart when you like raise your legs and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that way when there's more blood inside close to your core, it's staying together. There's less of it out all over your arms and legs where there's more surface area for it to potentially cool or heat. Let's go to the, where's the annotation button? Yes. Okay, we're gonna go do some quick art shenanigans. Okay, can y'all see the whiteboard?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, we're gonna draw, let's say we've got a hand or an arm. We've got a kind of thick arm and some poor thumbs, so whoever's arm this is. Okay, and then you're gonna have some blood coming in from, let's say, your heart, and this is going out, right, because arteries are gonna pump blood away from the heart, and then it's going to get to this part here, and then eventually it's going to turn into some veins, which are going to bring blood back to your body, right? Let's see, we'll write body. All right, y'all following me so far? Mm-hmm. Okay, so one thing that your body's going to do is that, this is actually something that Will mentioned and explained really well, but I think it just helps to draw it out, is that this blood coming fresh from your heart, do you think it's going to be relatively warm or relatively cold?
Warm.
It's going to be pretty warm, yeah, because your heart's pretty toasty, and so is the whole inside of your body. So it's usually pretty warm coming out to the rest of your body, which works well. It can be read to be oxygenated and to be warm. So we'll just, I don't know, we'll just put a random temperature. Let's say it's 90 degrees. I have no idea what the actual temperature would be, but we're just going to make that up. As it gets out to the rest of your body, it's going to get colder and colder as it's starting to lose heat. So it might be like 80 here and 70 here. Now, in order to preserve body heat, because you don't want to just perpetually freeze, and in case y'all didn't know, as endotherms, we actually burn a massive amount of energy just keeping our bodies warm. So generally speaking, we want to try and conserve a lot of heat. That's not always the case when it's super hot outside and you're walking out in the sun, but even then you want to conserve some heat. So what your body does is right as the vessels are going out, it has other vessels right next to it. So that way there is a little bit of heat transfer going from this warm vein, which maybe it's not the best drawn. Usually you'd have like the artery and the vein really close to each other. And that way, as this is going down, instead of wasting its heat to the outside, which is bad, you're just losing your heat, it's going to have a vessel really close to it, and the heat is going to warm up the blood that's coming back inside, so that, you know, maybe if this is, I don't know, 85 degrees here, and it can pass up some blood, or pass some of the heat over to the blood over here, now this blood going in is 80, which is still pretty darn warm. Whereas if this countercurrent exchange wasn't happening, maybe you'd get all the way down to 70 and come back to the body, cool down to 60 to 50, and then it'd be returning to the body really cold. So in order to keep the blood overall in the body warm, you put the vessels really close to each other, and then there's lots of heat exchange, which Will described really well, but I think it can help just to kind of see a picture and see what's going on, as well as a chance to show off my art skills, which I know y'all just love so much. Do you guys have any questions?
So is it the blood that transfers across since they're right next to each other? Or is it like just the heat?
Good question. If you're trying to get oxygenated blood to this pinky, do you want the blood itself to jump over here, or just to let the heat go across there?
Probably just the heat.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good question, though. And yeah, I didn't draw these super close to each other, but if you look, you can sometimes see it in the vessels in like your arm or something. But usually you have them like right next to each other. And you can just imagine having like, if one of your arms is warm and the other one's cold, and you put them together, the heat's going to transfer, but not necessarily blood or other things inside of it. And that way it keeps warm.
Okay.
Yeah. What other questions do y'all have? None? Okay. We'll go ahead and hop back to the worksheet then. Okay, oh my goodness, we have 7 minutes. All right, time to strap on some wings and fly. Number 12, what are some behavioral responses that organisms use to relate heat? So if it's really hot outside and you're near the beach, how can you regulate your body heat?
Go in the water?
Yeah, you jump in the water. It's a behavioral response. It's something that you are doing, right? Just as another behavior could be to spread out on the sand and absorb all the heat from that, or you can jump in the water and cool down. Kind of the same thing when you're getting super cold in the wintertime, you can kind of bundle yourself up. That's reducing your surface area to volume ratio by basically making yourself a ball. Remember, like ball-like shapes have a lower surface area to volume ratio, so there's less of you exposed to radiate heat. That would be like another behavioral thing you could do too. Number 13, how can organisms adjust their temperature using just metabolic activity? What were some of the things that y'all had for 13?
I put thermogenesis, which is just the variation in heat production, and then increasing muscle activity by like either moving or shivering.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also non-shivering thermogenesis, which is just you produce heat instead of ATP. And then there's also brown fat, which is usually found in the neck and between the shoulders. And it's just specialized for rapid heat production, and it's usually made in the presence of extra mitochondria.
Nice. That was everything and more. Awesome. Yeah, that's everything for 13. Thanks, Sam. All right, jumping on to 14. How can cells themselves change or adapt to different temperatures? So if it gets really cold outside, for example, how can the cell change its own composition in order to deal with the cold or the heat?
It changes its saturated fatty acids to unsaturated, so that way the membrane stays all fluid and jiggly.
Exactly, yeah. Because as it's getting colder, you're having less natural movement. There's less heat, so less kind of like wiggle if you want to think about it. Everyone's kind of cold and they just want to stay stiff and by themselves, which is then bad because if the cell gets too, excuse me, cold and stiff, then nothing's able to get from the outside to the inside. And if you're not having exchange, that's really not good. So cells will have more unsaturated fatty acids, which if y'all remember, unsaturated fatty acids have all those kinks, those bends in them, which makes them less solid, and so they're more fluid. I think they're just kind of bent funny, so there's more space for things to wiggle in and get from the inside to the outside or vice versa. Nice job, Cole. And then lastly, number 15, describe the interactions of the hypothalamus with the other body parts to regulate heat. Who would like to take 15? Sure, Haley.
So the hypothalamus is like one of the huge parts for homeostasis because it acts like a thermostat in either increasing production or decreasing our like body temperature, pH, and all that. And then it's also responsible for the circadian rhythm, which is just the natural cycle that your body goes through every day, and it can produce the melatonin needed for you to fall asleep, increase body temperature throughout the day to increase productivity, and basically just that.
Yeah, nice. Well said. And there's a really good picture. I think it's one of the ones in the PowerPoint. It kind of shows this too. It's like this pretty loop. And you can find basically the same thing for regulating blood sugar too. But yeah, there's all sorts of mechanisms for it. And this also kind of ties back into something earlier when we were talking about the nervous system and the endocrine system. There's actually a really cool part of the hypothalamus. Well, actually, the hypothalamus itself is kind of the link between the nervous system and the endocrine system. So it actually sends signals, which then gets the endocrine system to release its hormones. So there is a bit of a connection between the hormones and the nerves. And there's like a little pituitary gland that happens to be a lot of the connection. But we'll save that for later because I think that's going to show up when we go over the nervous system and things like that. So, okay, that's everything for this worksheet. Feel free to hang around longer if y'all have any additional questions or you're wondering about things with classes or studying for online things, anything like that. Feel free to stay around. If not, have a good night. Have fun studying, and I'll see y'all Tuesday.
See you later. Thank you, Liam.
See you guys.
Hey Liam, could you go over the simple really quick?
Yes. Actually, I will let Viraj, do you want to try and explain them?
Oh no, I was nodding because like that was my question because this whole I'm not too sure what we're supposed to like retain. Like I know the different types, but like I just don't know. It's really vague in my opinion on like what we need to know from that slide.
For the muscles.
For the epithelial slide.
Wait,
Yeah.
Cole, you're asking about muscles, right?
Or
were you asking about epithelial things?
Oh, I might have wrote down muscles by mistake. Yeah, the epithelial.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah. Yes, so there's a lot going on there. I would say like the main things to know for it. Think about understanding the shapes of it. So the cells can be what 3 different shapes?
So cuboidal, columnar, and squamous.
Yes. Which one looks like a pancake?
The squamous.
Mm-hmm. Which ones look like a pool noodle?
Cuboidal.
Columnar, yeah. The columnar ones think of like a big column, and then the cuboidal think of like a cube. They're more cube shaped. So there's 3 main different shapes maybe there might be more. You can talk to Dr. Dean or a histologist on it. But those are the three main shapes for cells. Then there's three different ways that you can arrange them. So you could have them simple, right, which is just like, think of like one layer of them totally flat. You could have them in multiple layers. Do y'all remember the term for that?
Is that the stratified?
Exactly, stratified. And for that, you can think of like a stratified like system in like a certain culture. There's different layers or levels. Same thing here. There's a stratification of like bottom cells to top cells. Not that anyone's more important than the other, but just that there's a layering of cells, a stratification. And then pseudo-stratified, which pretty much is only happening with columnar. And that's where they look like they're stratified. It looks like they're stacked on top of each other because the shapes are kind of weird looking. But in reality, there's only a single layer going on.
Okay, great.
So I would know the shapes, the kind of arrangements or layers of them. And then if you go back and listen to the presentation, she talks through how at certain areas of the body, they need certain things to happen. So like I think one thing she explained really well and is kind of is easier to understand is how in the lungs, you need a lot of gas exchange. And so you need a thin membrane where a lot of gas can get across. And so it would make sense to have the simple because you want that layer to be thin. You don't want it to be stratified. You want it to be nice and thin so that air can get across it. And then squamous, which has the most surface area to volume, which would allow for even more gas exchange. So you can kind of think as you go through different parts of the body, what needs to be here in order for this thing to function well. And so she lists off a couple, so I would go ahead and know those. If you want, I think the book also explains some other ones pretty well. But again, there's a whole class on it, so I wouldn't go outside of the PowerPoint. I wouldn't go super in depth to the plethora of information that the book has.
Yeah, she mentioned, so there was that one, the lungs, which was the simple squamous epithelium. So I got that one because you want the gas exchange and all that, which is thin. But like for the mouth, I just don't see any benefit for like the stratified. Like what's the benefit for having something stratified?
Yeah, that's a good question. So imagine if the cells in your mouth were a single layer and you're chewing on your nice bit of celery, and you accidentally, your cheek pops in a little bit and you bite your cheek. If it's only one cell thick and you bite through it, you've just ripped through your cheek.
Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't think of it.
Yeah, and so so you want something that can hopefully, like you can scrape off some of it and it's still going to be fine. And so that's why you want the layers there. Whereas your lungs are pretty well protected and you really need a lot of exchange and you don't really need protection in your lungs. Whereas you don't want exchange in your mouth. Like you don't want your saliva like going through a singular cell out to the outside of your cheek. So you want layers to keep things in as well as to kind of have like a bit of protection there.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Are columnar just like blood vessels then? Like
columnar is usually found in the digestive tract. You can also, they're also in a couple places, but the classic example is if you look at like the small intestine, if you could like zoom in on the small intestine, you have a bunch of villi, so like little tubes sticking up, and then off of each villi are more tubes sticking out, microvilli, and some I think even have another extension. So it's a ton of surface area to volume going on there. And so that's why if you ever see like the inside of a small intestine, it looks kind of velvety. So there's just a lot of these tiny, tiny, tiny little tubes, the villi and the microvilli. And then those have little columnar cells on them. So it works for catching nutrients and kind of absorbing them. So that's where you're most likely to find the columnar ones.
okay.
And then cuboidal, for whatever reason, just work well for secretions. I don't know the physiology behind that. Those are just the kind of cells that you'd find cuboidal cells in your stomach when you're secreting certain acids or other things. And other parts of your GI tract too.
Gotcha. I guess cuboidals like remind me of sponges. When you said like they secrete stuff, like if you squeeze a sponge, then like everything inside the sponge just kind of goes out.
Oh, yeah. If that helps you remember, that's a good way to do it.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you suggest that we Like, I mean, she sent I know you're gonna ask her, but like, I've been making my review. Like, she sent it yesterday, so I started like making a review based off like what she like pointed out for each chapter and like typing it on this like long Google Doc. And like, do you think it's pretty reliable that like she's most, or how am I supposed to phrase this? Like, if she sent it and like which concept she wants us to focus on, then I assume that's what she like out of the chapter. That's probably what she'll test on, right? I mean,
Yeah, someone asked about this at the start of the session. I would say that it seems to me that she's giving y'all an indication of what's important to study, but she only indicated, I think, maybe 15 or 20 sections, and the test is probably going to have 60 to 80 questions. It seems unlikely to me. If I was studying for it, I'd be a little skeptical because that means she's pulling 3 to 4 questions per small section
yeah,
instead of like, 1 or 2 questions from that section and 1 or 2 from the rest of the chapter. So if you're thinking about what to study for the final, I would go back and study everything. Those are probably things to study first, or the most important things, or it could just be those are like really confusing topics or things that are really core to understanding a lot of other stuff. But I would recommend studying that because she's told you to study it, but also study more than that. I think it's unlikely that you just have to study that for the final.
yeah, it seems too easy. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, it would be really weird to break down, like 30 or 40 chapters into 15 or 20 sections, period.
Right. All right. Cool. Well, that's all the questions I had. Thank you so much, Liam.
Yeah, have a good night, Raj.
You too.
I gotta head out. See you, Liam.
Okay, cool. See you, Cole. Have a good night.